All right, perfect. And we're live. Thank you for joining us for another DCC Presents the Quarter of Prep. Tonight we have John Cronin and Dylan Orth to present with us Locations 101. I'll let you guys take it away from here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Dylan.
And I'm John.
I am a senior here at DePaul. I study film. I've worked on a bunch of different shorts here at DePaul, along with back home in Minnesota, where John and I are both from. John.
Yeah, I'm a senior at the University of Minnesota. I'm not a film major. I'm actually studying strategic communications. I have a background in business and logistics. And I was a producer on a feature with Dylan this summer called Undergrads.
So yeah, a little bit about us before we jump into locations here. John and I were lucky to work on our own feature this summer, along with our other good friend Andrew. So that was a big experience for us where we learned a lot. We are also students. We did a lot of things wrong, but learned from those too. So we will mostly follow our experience from this past summer as we go through this presentation here. So starting off with locations, something that we've all had to do and something you'll be thinking about whether you're writing the script yourself or for something of this scale as a student in production. If you're doing locations, you're likely going to be a producer on the project too. So you'll be coming on earlier on in pre-production. You'll be looking at the script and you will have an idea of where you're shooting at. If you're shooting in Chicago or the Chicagoland area, I know a lot of people here are from that area. You have some things to think about of, can you shoot at your hometown? Do you have family or friends who know somebody who owns a restaurant or a bar, or even just like so knowing somebody who knows somebody? Those little connections, like your school or your alma mater, it can really come in handy for us. We shot in St. Paul, Minnesota, where we're from, so we were able to find those little. It was kind of like a novelty thing to be shooting a movie around there, which you might find depending where you're from. And we were really lucky to find people who were willing to help us out, which John will talk more about as we go here. But if you do know your area, it makes it a lot easier to go out and scout. If you don't, all the more reason to really go out, drive around, scout out what you're looking for based on what's in your script. Some things to think about as you're scouting. If you have a sort of base area where you're going to be coming from, for us, again, it was St. Paul. It was John's house specifically. So it was always thinking about, okay, how far are we from John's house? Think about the basics of, like, are you under a flight path? Are you by a highway? Just those little things with sound that could be an issue. Is there foot traffic if you're shooting something outside? That could be a problem. And then, of course, now in these times that we're in and could be in for a while with COVID, that adds a whole different element to your scout, which we will again talk about more later. And from there, you can kind of put together your short list for each location. Here are some thoughts on where we could shoot this. So an example that we were working with, we had this restaurant scene. We had our dream location, which was Mickey's, and John, who, by the way, John was really the one who helmed locations for us. I helped out, but it was John's thing. So he'll be butting in quite often with useful information. But you want to talk about Mickey's a little bit, John?
Yeah. So and kind of through multiple changes, but Mickey's, like, from the start was something that was kind of their dream spot. So I've talked to them pretty early on a couple times. I actually went in and talked with the owner twice, and that second time, like, it felt like we had a deal all lined up. And when he asked us, like, how much we could pay for it, I said we're students, we could pay $700, and he said, add another zero to that, my friend. And so quickly we had to pivot to a couple other locations. So just, again, like Dylan said, just have a short list so you have backup options.
And we did have our backup options. We up top there and Day by Day on the bottom. We had an agreement with Capital View, and then we didn't last minute. John, again, we'll talk more about that later, but I guess the more places you can have on your short list, the better, because we put ourselves in a position where we didn't have a fourth thing in mind. So John did a lot of driving around, like while we were in production, looking for a location. But I'll let him talk about that later.
Yeah. So I'll probably touch on this on the next slide. So as you're going through, once you get your short list and go through the scripts, just stay organized as possible. I created a spreadsheet. This is a screenshot on the screen there towards the end of everything when I had things more verbally locked. I used like a color code system to kind of just track progress and update Dylan and Andrew on how I was doing. Also staying organized, just create a script for all the phone calls and emails you're sending out. It makes it a lot easier when you can just, read straight from something that you'll learn over time what you need to say and kind of just perfect that script. If you give a couple of calls and the location owner is asking the same types of questions, add that to the script so you don't have to, cover that over and over again. And don't throw away locations that, let's say you had like 3 restaurants that all were down for you to shoot there. As soon as you lock one of them, don't just like forget about the others. Like we just mentioned, have backup options. So just keep the contacts in touch, be professional, and let them know we want this other route, but if something changes, we'll be in touch. And that could make the difference between like a nightmare scenario and like having a good backup option. And then just being patient. It can take a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, especially with COVID. I feel like it would have been a lot easier to go to these businesses in person, but with COVID, having restaurants shut down, I just feel like it's a little more difficult to just make all those phone calls, but it'll just take time. And going on, so location agreements. Again, I did not have much film knowledge going into this, but there were a lot of templates available online. However, don't just copy and paste. We went through a couple of templates, found one that looks right for us, and then I edited that PDF to really, I customized it. So I added our like LLC name on there. I added our film name on there, so it looked official and not, some watermark that says like filmagreements.com on there. So really know every clause. If you know a lawyer, I would consult with them just to have your bases covered. And again, your job is to uphold that agreement, so you have to know everything. You can't show up to a meeting and have the owner say like, "What's modification of property?" and you don't know what that is. So just know your stuff. Certificate of insurance, you're probably going to want to have it depending on the scale of your projects. Again, I'm new to this, but if you're shooting a feature, almost guaranteed you need it. If you're shooting for school, I don't know how DePaul does it, but we were incorporated as an LLC, so it was fairly standard for us to get it. I think you could do it if you were an individual as well. Again, kind of bouncing off that lawyer thing. If you know an insurance agent in your network, use them, because I really didn't know much about insurance, and that our agent just set that up for us. I still to this day don't really know what is covered for us. I have the contracts, but I don't really know. He was kind of our go-to guy for that. Some of the key items on the agreement would be the schedule. So when you're going to come to shoot, and again, overestimate on that. If you think it's going to be a 6-hour shoot, put 8 hours. Give yourself more than enough time to get done what you need to get done. Modification of property, that just allows you to take down paintings and stuff like that. The payments and rights to recording, just make sure at the end of the day, probably the most important thing is to make sure that you can legally show their business, and save everything. So save, screenshots of text conversations. Just, you never know when you might need things. Any paperwork you fill out with location, obviously save. That should go without saying.
And I would just add that if you're a student at DePaul, you know that DePaul does have templates with DePaul's own verbiage on them for all of these things. I think they're all on the SEA page on D2L. So those are there. You can kind of, I think, save that step that we had to go through tracking down and modifying our own documents. I know since we were working on this, I didn't work on anything last year, and I know there were some changes as far as insurance goes with DePaul. I think you have to go about securing your own. It's not like how it used to be, to my understanding. But like John said, something that you want to have. Most locations are going to want you to prove it. If you're renting equipment from a third party, if you're not using DePaul stuff, same deal. You're going to have to provide some sort of proof of insurance, certificate of insurance.
Yeah, I guess one final thing with insurance is that's the best thing you can say to a location, that you have insurance. Like, that's in all my phone calls, like the turning point for most of them from being like uninterested and like making a possibility was when I mentioned, oh, we have insurance, by the way. That's when they really understand, okay, this is like legit. These aren't just some kids coming in to shoot like a music video. So you use that line when you need it. So meeting with the location owner, it's kind of like the negotiations, I guess, when you sign the agreement. Like I said last slide, just be prepared, know everything. Manage expectations. What I mean here is like, be as detailed as you can about how many people you're bringing in, what kind of equipment you're bringing in. There's kind of a fine line there. As students and as independent filmmakers, you might have to kind of blur that line a little bit sometimes to kind of sell yourselves smaller than you actually are. But just be as ethical as you can. The worst thing you can do is kind of paint this picture that you're going to bring in like 10 people and, you know, some small lights, but then you show up with like 20 people and like a generator and all this fancy stuff. So just manage expectations. You don't want any surprises on the day you get there. That's pretty bad. This is a screenshot of just a text I had with the location owner. Just over communicating, being courteous, getting a meeting set up. Another thing I'll add here is Airbnbs is kind of a special area, I guess I would say. This summer on Undergrads, we used 4 Airbnbs, and I looked up like the Airbnb policies. I went on some like film forums online to kind of find a clear answer on how to approach shooting at an Airbnb. There really wasn't a clear yes or no, like black and white answer there. But I guess how I would approach it, how we did it was for 3 of those Airbnbs, we were also housing cast and crew there. So we had it booked for like 2 weeks at a time. So I booked and then I messaged the host after booking just saying, hey, is it all right if we shoot, you know, a scene or 2 in our student project here? And they were both cool with it. The 4th location, we shot at a cabin, which was like 2 hours away, or like an hour and a half away from our home base. It was a 3-day shoot. It was a very specific cabin we needed for the film and the script. It had to be lakefront. It had to be, again, within an hour and a half of the cities. Had to be within our budget. So that one, we went a little more rogue and just booked it and shot without permission. Just a risk that we kind of felt like we had to take because we couldn't afford to pay something better or risk getting denied. And that's something now, even putting together this presentation, I realized if we want to get distribution for this feature, we're probably going to have to go back there and get something signed or some type of agreement filled. Potentially. Again, we're going to have to talk with the lawyer about that because we're not 100% on that. But in general, I would say if you are housing cast and crew there, if it's a long-term stay, book it and then ask. If it's like a 1 or 2 day shoot where you're literally coming in just to film, that's when you'd probably want to be upfront about it to avoid, again, worst case with that situation is that they bust you and like they shut you down. But if you're staying there for 2 weeks, worst case, they bust you and then you just sneak in like another day. So that's what I would say there. Again, I'm not a film professional, so.
And all that aside, especially if you're shooting a short, I know a lot of people I've talked to, the safest way to go, the smartest way to go, have some options. You know, you're going to start looking earlier on. You look, you say, oh, I like that apartment. You know, you look at that. Just stay here. You know, stay here. We're looking to shoot a student feature. Is that cool? Is it not cool? Get that definitive answer right away because, again, our situation was a little different because we actually were housing members of our cast and crew there too. So we had a more long-standing, 2-week agreement with the owners. But I think given the extra time and less pressure of having to house people, it makes the most sense to just, again, create a short list of your Airbnbs and reach out to those owners beforehand so you're totally secure when you're there.
Yeah, I mean the Airbnb owners, like probably the main motivations are one, money, like they're rented out for money, and two, they just don't want to risk any damage. So if you have, like, we had a long term stay at those Airbnbs, so they already had a guaranteed income for 2 weeks. And the certificate of insurance again too is the main thing to pull out. Like if there's any questions, you say we have insurance, damage will be covered. Um, yeah. So for me, kind of the main advice I guess I would give, the most important thing when it comes to location manager, is just that relationship building with the location owner and yourself. The better relationship you have, the more lenient they might be down the road. So, like an example that would be, I mean, these screenshots are me talking with one of the Airbnb hosts. We broke a pot in their house, and she was super chill about it because we had talks, throughout production. We kept them updated on, everything. So she was okay with it. Another example would be we were shooting at a bar, and we had a really good relationship with that owner. And we had to move around a lot of stuff in that bar. We had to take down, like, drill paintings off the wall and stuff, which would be covered in the modification of property clause in the contract. But even so, I'm sure there are owners out there who, if they see you, changing the way the bar looks, they might get a little grumpy or raise a stink on the day of shooting, which is just more stressful than it needs to be. So if you have a good relationship, our production designer just asked the bar owner, like, hey, can I take down this painting? And he was like, yeah, sure, you're good. So just cultivate that good relationship, communicate. Another big tip I would say is call the day before you're going to shoot at a location just to make sure everything's good. We had, like Dylan mentioned earlier, we had a restaurant cancel on us the day before. So I spent the day scrambling to find a different location. So just call to 4, just so you don't avoid any last minute surprises. Just over plan, all that good stuff. And then assessing risks. So I guess what I mean here is just kind of was talking about earlier with the Airbnbs, how we shot without permission. Just know the risks you're taking by making certain decisions. I was always asking myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? Whenever we got to a location or every decision we made, I just, know what's the worst case and be prepared to, like, have to deal with it. So like filming without permission or soft permission, there were some, like, we shot at the exterior of some, like, restaurants where we weren't inside, but we were showing their logo. So we just had, like, a quick phone call. Just know that that could potentially hurt you down the road, depending on if you want to distribute your film, if you want to make money, you're going to, if a distribution company picks you up, they're going to want location agreements for every business logo location that's in your film. So deal with it sooner rather than later, because if you let's say you get into Sundance and win or something, and or some other festival, and the business sees that, they're going to want money. So get it done before you're going to make any type of money, or just don't tell them. Get everything in writing to be safe as possible, and just logistics too. Are your locations realistic with the shooting schedule? I think Dylan will touch on this too when he's talking about the on-set stuff. But if you have 2 locations, this is common sense. Like if you have 2 locations 30 minutes away, just like know where you have to be, make sure it's realistic, and cover your bases there.
So, in addition to all the other legalities and things that John has mentioned, the last little pieces, permits. If you shot in Chicago, especially, you've probably had to deal with this just because you can't. It's not possible to, like, quickly hop on a road, shoot something, because it's the roads are tight. There's cars, there's cops everywhere. So you're gonna want to get a permit, and it's pretty easy in Chicago. I'm more familiar with doing this in Chicago. You go onto the film office website. There's a really great discount for students. All you really need to know what streets you're shooting in between, and how much of the street you need. If you need it to be blocked, the whole street to be blocked off, or just parking spots, which I think for the most part, you're going to be looking at parking spots for sure. If you have a grip truck, even just cars, and you want to block a certain portion of the road off, you can do that. In my experience, they've been very helpful on the phone, that office, with any questions you have. As long as I think the site recommends like 2 weeks in advance. Do it 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in advance. as with anything, the earlier you can get it done, the better. So that's something you definitely, especially in Chicago, going to want to do. Something we ran into at Stack Deck Brewing, picture up in the top right corner there, had all of our agreements for shooting inside of the location. We had a great relationship with the owner, and they were cool with showing obviously everything in their location, their sign outside, everything. And as we get closer to shooting, we sort of, and this was a situation where it was us making a mistake. We realized that Stack Deck didn't own the overall building, right? They weren't the overall owner of this whole skyrise type building. It was some other company. And so technically we would have to secure the rights from them, and we were kind of, we had a little panic moment. But we reached out to the St. Paul Film Office, Minnesota Film Office. We reached out to the city. We reached out to the police, and with all that communication, what we basically found out, you can see the little, and John, you might want to talk about this little email that was from the police department.
That was from the city permits guy. Yeah, so we called the police because we were going to be shooting like till 5 a.m. So we were going to be just on the public city sidewalks late at night. So I called the non-emergency police line just to let them know. So like if someone called on us, that they'd be aware. And they were pretty cool with it. Yeah, so just communicating with police. We also had when we were shooting at the cabin, the neighbors called the police on us because we were parked like illegally, maybe, I don't know.
It wasn't illegal.
On the side of the road.
But yeah.
So with that situation, he called the police on it and he threatened us in the morning he was going to call the police. So then I called the local sheriff to tell the sheriff like ahead of time, this crazy neighbor might be calling on us. We're going to be gone in a day. Are we good? And he was cool with it. So I guess if you think you're going to be disturbing the public, just call the police ahead of time, let them know calmly what you're doing, and hopefully they're going to be chill with it.
Because I guess what we kind of realized in that moment, by looking at the permit office, we realized that within our level of production and the student level of production, you're not going to be, if you're bringing a whole 100-person crew, obviously you're looking at a different situation. If you look at a small student crew, the one major thing that could really mess you up is you're shooting outside, you got your camera, all of a sudden cop rolls up and you're dealing with them for half an hour. So if you kind of cover that base, nobody else is going to interfere with you. And if you're not, we didn't show any logos of this building or any, city landmarks or anything like that. So know what you're shooting. Obviously, if you're trying to drive around with cars and stuff, that's going to be a different situation. But if you're just shooting somebody walking down the street, that's what we were doing. You don't have to necessarily go above and beyond and get all these permits that you don't really need. And then another little thing I just added in there, I haven't dealt with this myself, but I've just heard this. I'm sure any of you taking a production class have heard this too. If you're dealing with guns in your movie, most people advise to avoid it. Obviously, a lot of stories might call for that. So if you have them, definitely you're going to want to follow those steps. I mean, again, that's just kind of a common sense thing. But I know there's a permit process for that. There's a whole communication that you'll need to have with the local police authorities with that. So from what else you're going to want to do. So as we've kind of touched on this throughout the presentation, any of you who've shot something in the past few months have, I'm sure, come across these considerations, or if you're thinking about it, all the same. Some things that because we were trying to figure things out when we were entering into production, this particular white paper wasn't even created yet, so we were really just kind of basing ourselves off of the CDC and of what we thought could be the safest way to do. There was an initial draft of the white paper that there's a picture of here, but nothing's super established yet. So just some basic things that we were always considering. Are you, if you're, have you ever seen that's indoors? One thing you might want to think about, could it be outdoor? We had a situation, actually a couple, where we really were dead set on we want this to be inside. Didn't think it would work. You know, all these things that you think when you're so involved and you're like, oh, this just has to be inside. And we ended up being outside for one reason or another. Mostly it was like, all right, we have to just do this for safety, and ended up being better. If it's winter, different story, but you try to. There are definitely more possibilities to shoot outside than you think. Just another just random things. Are there windows? Can you get airflow going through this building? Are you gonna have a lot of cast members and crew members there? How packed is it gonna be? How long are you gonna be shooting there? Those are all just those little things that you might not think about until you're there, and it's like, oh, we have 15 people in this little space. This is a problem. Another big thing to consider with your space, and this even goes back to when you're scouting, is there space to set up crafty? Is there space to eat? Eating is probably going to be your biggest, outside of your cast who's going to have to be unmasked. Eating is going to be your biggest risk because everybody's unmasked, everybody's eating. So do you have adequate space to spread everybody out? Something that we ran into a couple times was it rains. Oh no, we can't eat outside. Do you have a plan for that if it rains, so that you don't have everybody crammed inside without their masks on? The CDC guidelines are like the base level. Those are the easier ones to really focus on. The white paper, you look that up, it's right on there. All of the guilds came together and put that document together. There are some basic things like obviously masks and temp monitoring, pulse oximeter monitoring, how to serve food safely, that are easy to do. But this is a document that's developed for big budget projects, so it's not necessarily going to be possible for a student production to follow every single step of it. But there's this concept of zones that they talk about in the pages of, you have your zone of people who will be maskless like cast, who are in close contact with maskless people. And there's the different zone of like, okay, you're offset. How do you stay safe out there? So it's at least, if nothing else, it's a good thing to just be mindful of and to think of, okay, yeah, we can't give everybody their own hotel room to stay in individually, but we can have a conversation about how we can stay safe when we're not on set, so that we're not going out, getting the virus, bringing it back to the set. It's kind of doing the best you can to create your little bubble, and it, in a lot of ways, starts with your locations. And John's talked about a lot of this already. Just over communicate, common courtesy, little logistic things to think about. Can you use power at this place? Are there bathrooms? Is there a place to park? If you're at especially in Chicago, or if you're at a building like a bar or a club or something where there's not a lot of street parking, will you get a voucher for parking in the ramp, or are you gonna have to cover that expense for everybody? Is it gonna be a hard out? Most of the time, that answer is yes. We, again, just especially with John, was really cultivating these relationships. We had really a lot of luck with our locations, and they were very lenient with us. But there was one location where the woman had a bad experience prior, which again, just with John talking to her, she told him about this bad of somebody else filming there. So she needed us like completely no trace of us by a certain time. And there was a situation where, okay, there's not going to be, we're not going to have an extra hour to mess around here. We need to be out. So that's something that you just know you need to communicate with the owner and with your team. If you are starting to run behind schedule, You're going to be communicating with them. In our situations, we usually reached sort of a new agreement, which is really just like a little bit of extra pay or offering a ride or an Uber home. Because ultimately, and how we kind of looked at things was on the scale of a student production, these locations are more or less doing you a favor because the money you have to offer them is, or the exposure is probably not that lucrative. So keep that in mind. You're in their space, especially with COVID. That's a big thing to keep in mind. John's talked about neighbors already. We had a situation where shooting. It's a Friday night, later at night, in St. Paul. The neighbors next door were people around our age. Talked to them; they were very chill. I think we gave them a case of beer or something. But be aware that if you're shooting late at night, is it a Tuesday night? Is it a work night? Are you going to be disturbing people with your lights or with your noise? Definitely, we did get lucky just being in them. It was more a lot of students living around, but know that, communicate with those people, and just be mindful of how you can respect their space when you're doing that.
Yeah, and I guess kind of lastly, just kind of a brief case study of all the locations in our film. So we have our external locations. Those are the ones where we had to like make a bunch of phone calls, lock stuff up, get location agreements. They were like we didn't have any connection with them. We had internal locations, which were just like my house, for example, that we just had the whole time, easy locks, and then shooting on public property. Our total location spend was roughly $1,300. Half of that was on that cabin Airbnb. And in terms of like pricing on that, we definitely played the student card, trying to kind of undersell ourselves as best we could. Plus, with the pandemic, the bar and the club weren't getting a lot of business, so they were okay with us, shooting on very incredibly minimal discounts. Yeah, I'm trying to think anything to add on how we approach. I guess one thing I would add when talking to location owners, I guess depending on where you are, assume that the location owner doesn't know anything about film. Don't come in and use terms that they wouldn't understand. Like really simplify it, break it down. For the most part, they're probably going to be excited. So like if once they generally agree with having you shoot there, they're going to be excited. They're going to want to help as best they can. Hopefully, it's a unique thing to have a bunch of students come and shoot a movie. It's just I don't know. It's a fun little venture for you and for the location. So make it fun, stay lighthearted, and just
It does depend a little bit on where you're at. Chicago, it's not as much of a novelty thing because there's always a TV show being shot. And there's a little more activity in the film world here, but still, ultimately, yeah. If you make that relationship with these location owners, and get them excited, especially being students. If you get them excited about a group of students making something that they're excited about, and bringing them in on that experience, they're going to be excited about it. They're going to hopefully want you to, want their business to be captured within the movie. And certainly, if you're shooting outside of a big city, if you're shooting, wherever your hometown in Montana or wherever, then then you're really dealing with like a whole, like, it's a novelty thing that's going to be all of them. It's going to be even more easy to generate that excitement with these locations.
Do we have any that's like all we have. Are there any questions?
No, that was perfect. Thank you guys. No questions came through in the live stream, but if anybody's interested in watching after the fact, it will be posted on YouTube. Thank you both for coming in. I know I learned a lot, and I hope anybody who watches afterwards or during learned a lot. Just check our social media page for the next DCC event. So thanks for joining. Bye.
Cool. Thanks, Sam.
No problem.